Hi, welcome to another episode of the Paige Doodle Club. I'm Mike Paige, and today we're going to pick up where we left off on our portrait of Kurt Russell. Here's the finished thing that we're working toward. So join in, don't be afraid to make mistakes. I certainly made plenty in the process, and you just gotta roll with the punches and figure out how to get where you want to end up. All right, so on this episode of the Kurt Russell portrait, we're going to try to finish up the eyes, get that detail in, and we'll probably get the nose done as well. So for Kurt Russell's eyes, his eyes are very expressive and kind of heavy-lidded. I'm going to go ahead and make those a little darker on the tops of the eyelids, and then I'm going to start to sketch in the iris and the pupil. One common mistake that people will make as they're drawing eyes is they make the iris almost football shape. So you want to make sure that as you're drawing this, if you continued the circle around, it's going to be a circle. You don't want to be making two parentheses here that if you continued them would just make a football shape, if that makes sense. And then the other thing is we want to make sure that the two eyes are about the same, the irises are about the same size. So this eye over here looks a little bit smaller. Now that I have that, I'm going to add in the pupils. And the important thing as you're making a pupil is you want this outer iris circle, if it was all the way around, you want your pupil to be parallel to that. So I guess this would be a concentric circle inside of it. And I'm leaving a small reflection in the pupil. And then we're going to do the same thing over on this side. And then sort of the test of whether you did it right is now that you've got your second pupil, kind of compare them. Are they the same size? Hopefully the answer is yes. And for the lower lids here, also you might notice that the eyelid intersects the eye. Some people it will intersect the upper and lower eyelid, like really cut off the iris. And some people's eyes, you see a good chunk of it, but they'll always break it off. You don't want to see a full circle inside of there unless their eyes are really open wide. As I'm doing the lower eyelid, I had mentioned in the beginning of the portrait that I'm not using any eraser here, so any marks that I'm making as I go, I'm stuck with them. I think it's helpful as a viewer to see the whole process, and that means you can also see any mistakes that I make. And if this turns out like garbage, then you see that as well. And you might be watching right now, criticizing how it's coming out, and that's fine. So next I'm going to start sketching lightly where the eyelids are. And Kurt Russell has lighter eyes, But there's going to be a darker ring on the outside edge of the pupil. And depending on the person you're looking at, sometimes that ring is very dark and sometimes it's relatively light. And then there's also going to be a shadow on the upper part of the iris from the eyelashes. And believe it or not, the eyelashes will actually cast enough of a shadow there that it's going to almost alter the shape. So now we're not seeing a circle here, we're seeing sort of a crescent shape. So right here I'm curving in sharper right there on both sides like that. And then I'm sort of extending that eyelash line down a little bit lower to create that shadow. And then we can lightly shade in the rest of the eye. And you can use different parts of the pencil tip for different things. I just used the tip right there, but typically for that type of shading, I would actually flip the pencil to the side and use sort of the side of the tip. You can also, you can make different strokes by putting your finger right on top of the point of the pencil as well. So you're going to get very different marks from the pencil based on how you're holding it. And if you're somebody that's very heavy-handed and you have a hard time drawing light, one thing you can do is change your grip so that you're holding it way back here. It's a lot harder to draw, really press down as you're drawing if you're holding it way back here at the end of the pencil. So that's one thing you can try out. Next, I'm going to start blocking in his nose. So initially I'm just going to make sort of a bowl shape down here, sort of a smushed letter U. And I'm struggling here, I will admit, because the angle that I'm sitting at, I'm kind of having to change things, but also the head is facing this way. So normally I would want to shift my body further over towards the right so I'm looking at it right. So if you're drawing a portrait where the head is angled, you'll definitely kind of want to change how you're sitting to be viewing it correctly. So I'm going to be struggling remembering to angle everything this way based on the way that I'm sitting. So the next thing, now that you have this U shape, next you're going to make sort of a smushed rainbow shape right next to it to start the nostrils. And from there, you're basically going to make parentheses on either side. However, you're going to want to draw them lightly initially so that you can make changes if necessary. Most people's noses, this technique of blocking it in will work. So you start off with a smushed U, then you make two smushed rainbows, make some parentheses, and you'll have the nose shape. I don't typically sort of fill it in as much as I already have. With noses, I find that less is more. The less that I'm actually drawing it, it works better when you're shading the nose in rather than drawing it in. So now that I know that this is relatively correct in size, this nostril is, I think both nostrils are a little too tall. So I'm going to bring those down slightly, but and then this nostril area here we're going to shade darker. I think noses are one of the things that most people really struggle to draw. But again, if you break it into simple enough shapes, they become a lot easier. Now, the next thing that a lot of people when they draw a nose, just sort of do like a circle, 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 2 lines up. That doesn't really work. So what we're going to do now, instead of drawing 2 straight lines up here, we're going to very lightly shade in the side of the nose. And I'm going to have to do it dark enough for you to see it, but light enough that it's still kind of what I want. And we're just going to kind of come to about there and then stop. And from here we're going to come almost all the way up to the eyebrow here. So this area is just slightly darker. And then same thing on the other side, rather than draw a line, going to, and his nose has like a slight crook right here. So you want to make note of that when you're drawing a specific person. Pay attention to the details of their face. Everybody's face is a little bit different. And he has one more little line like that in here. And I'm going to want this shading to come down to the top of that nostril. And some people like to use their finger to blend. You can try that as well. And then there will also be shading on the lower part of the nose. And depending on how round and bulbous someone's nose is, that will determine how much shading they have on their nose. So now I'm going to start making it slightly darker down at the very bottom part. Give it a little more depth. And we can start to imply those smile lines coming out. And next I'm going to block in the eyebrows. I had mentioned earlier that if you try drawing every single hair of the eyebrow, it usually doesn't work. What I'm going to do here is I'm actually using the side of the pencil and just getting sort of the right value of the shading. But one thing I will say as you're doing eyebrows, you might have noticed that I'm going this way. If you pay attention to the direction that eyebrows grow, they're growing sort of this direction outwards. If I was to shade this up and down here, it's going to look wrong. So you always want, anytime you're drawing hair or tree branches or anything like that, you want to do it in the direction that it grows. It will make a tremendous difference. And almost everybody's eyebrows are going to have a couple spots that are a little bit darker. And next what I'm going to do, I'm going to add a tiny bit more shading on the eyes. And I'm not sure how well it will show up for you, but it's important to, unless they're in really incredible studio lighting, there's going to be a shadow on the eye, and it's going to be really light. Again, if you have a hard time drawing light, change your grip on the pencil so you're way back here. And you can almost, like you're doing the rubber pencil trick, and it'll be a lot harder to draw dark. But so I'm just adding a little bit more value to the eyes so they're not perfectly white. And then same thing in the eye socket area, we're just going to add a little bit of shading in. And I'm realizing that the bridge of the nose should be a little bit narrower here. And then very lightly I'm shading across. Almost, this part is almost a circle on his nose, so I'm lightly shading across like this. And then I'm going to fill in just above it a little bit. And I think I'll take a break there. We'll pick this up again on the next episode.